Hello, everyone, and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms,
And your co-host, Anton Paras.
and we're in a new season, season 6, and we're now in spooky season, Anton.
Oh my gosh, and what a better way to kick off spooky season and season 6 than with this fatal fury of a film.
Yeah, I don't know if you would call this a traditional horror movie. I have this later in the notes, like questioning, like, is Fatal Attraction actually a horror movie?
Oh, it's terrifying, I'll tell you that.
Oh, I think it is. Now, Wikipedia calls it a psychological thriller,
Mm-hmm.
but it's our podcast and spooky season. You can incorporate a lot of different things in it. I mean, the film that we're covering in a week or two is Zodiac, which again, that's not something I would call a horror movie, but it certainly fits the bill for spooky season scary movies. It deals with a serial killer, an unsolved case. It's
Yeah,
scary enough.
I mean, we can all agree that psycho thrillers, erotic thrillers, horror films, they're eliciting these feelings of just horror. And we're going to dive into it, but this one definitely throws us for a loop.
The film we're covering today is Fatal Attraction, and I had not seen it in well over 10 years. It had been a long time. It was an absolute joy to revisit.
Oh, well,
Better than I remembered it.
it's been a few years since I've seen it too, but it is one of those films that stick with you because very well done. I mean, we're going to go into it a bit more, but so much going for this film. Like as a movie, there's a lot to appreciate here.
It's a classic for a reason. Let's get into this. For Dan Gallagher, life is good. He is on the rise at his New York law firm. He's happily married to his wife, Beth, and he has a loving daughter, Ellen. But after a casual fling with a sultry book editor named Alex Forrest, everything changes. Jilted by Dan, Alex becomes unstable, her behavior escalating from aggressive pursuit to obsessive stalking. Dan realizes that his main problem is not hiding his affair, but rather saving himself and his family. Fatal Attraction was released on September 18th, 1987 by Paramount Pictures. Directed by Adrian Lyne, screenplay by James Dearden based on the TV film Diversion by James Dearden, starring Michael Douglas, Glenn Close, Ann Archer, Ellen Hamilton Latson, Stuart Pankin, and Ellen Foley. The budget was $14 million. That is $38 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office, this surprised me, $320 million. That is $884 million adjusted for inflation. Internationally, this was the highest grossing film of 1987.
Oh, I mean, it took the world by storm. It was number one for weeks.
Yeah, this was a
but-
phenomenon.
But we've already hinted a lot. We've already talked about how much this film is such a cultural icon. Pat, why was this movie chosen?
It is one of the most famous thrillers of all time. You kind of doubt that a movie like this would make that kind of money today. Like, I can't really picture an erotic thriller, horror-ish movie being released in 2024 and making $800 million. Very much a product of the 1980s, and I don't mean that in a bad way. A film being a product of its time is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we have evidence that this wouldn't be a big box office hit today because this film was recently adapted for a streaming series on Paramount Plus, which I have not seen and I really don't know much about. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know much about it.
It lasted a season.
Did you see it?
I did not see it. I just remember thinking maybe I should check it out because I really like the movie. But it only lasted one season and then got canceled, so cannot confirm nor deny.
I thought about watching it, but number one, I didn't care that much. Number two, I don't have the time. And number three, I actually think this story works really well as just a 2-hour movie. I don't think this needs to be extended into a series. So 1987, Michael Douglas was top billed in this film. And looking back on it, 1987 was absolutely the peak of his career. So he's in this movie, the highest grossing film of the year. He also, more famously, played Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, for which he would win the Academy Award for Best Actor. That's a heck of a peak.
Yeah, big movie star.
This film got 6 nominations at the Oscars: Picture, Director, Actress, Supporting Actress, Adapted Screenplay, and Editing. It got shut out, didn't win any of them, which we'll get to. But this film was influential for a lot of different reasons, right? It basically created two subgenres of film, which I think is pretty rare. Number one, I don't know if it created, but it popularized what you would call the
Mhm.
blank from hell, nanny from hell, woman from hell, lawyer from
Mhm.
hell, boyfriend from hell, tenant from hell. So after this movie came out, you had a bunch of, I would say, similar type of thrillers that came along: Sleeping with the Enemy, Malice, Single White Female, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Pacific Heights, The Temp, Domestic Disturbance, Fear, Poison Ivy, and Swim Fan, which came years later. And they're still doing variations on this today, right? We see stuff like this that's released every few years.
Yeah, there was of course, the really famous Miller's Girl that got released this year, kind of in that erotic thriller genre. It definitely takes a public eye just because these kinds of films are very thrilling, but I think this was the heyday.
It definitely was the heyday, and you could make the case that this is the best of its kind. It was the first and best of its kind. Actually, let me back up for a second. I don't know that it was the first of its kind, because this movie was very much influenced by something like what's the Clint Eastwood movie called? Play Misty for me,
Play Misty for me,
which
classic.
was years before this. So it is not the first of its kind, but it was the first of its kind for an even more boutique subgenre of film called Michael Douglas is horned up and nearly ruins his life.
Oh, Michael Douglas.
Michael Douglas. Other famous examples of this include two films that we are going to cover on this podcast at some point: Basic Instinct and Disclosure.
Yes, and listeners may recall Basic Instinct, of course, for the infamous scene with Sharon Stone, and Disclosure for its feature with Demi Moore, and then also being referenced in the show Bob's Burgers with Disclosure the musical. So,
Really?
oh yeah, it's pretty hilarious.
That's good. Have you seen that recently?
I haven't seen it recently. It's been a bit, but
It's not good.
well, I'll say this: the horned up Michael Douglas genre is a pretty fun genre.
It's very fun. I'm not really sure why it is, and I don't know if it would work with many other actors. Yeah, there's just something entertaining about watching Michael Douglas be horned up and nearly ruining his life.
I think part of it is he plays it straight. He's the same character basically in each one,
He
but
is.
the way he plays it is just, I think, one, hilarious, and also he still brings his like Michael Douglas charm to each thing. So it just kind of adds that nice elevated, like it feels like a gilded piece of trash in the way that this feels like a very trashy genre, but it's Michael Douglas, so it's fun.
Right. Yeah, he's an interesting actor. I do like Michael Douglas. I can't say that he is an actor of great range. He plays a lot of the same characters over and over, which is the
Oh
point
yeah.
you were just making. Like, for example, I don't think he'd be very good at playing a poor person. When I think of Michael Douglas, I think of like he just excels at just playing a rich yuppie,
Yeah, and I mean
but that's okay.
that's exactly the kind of role that you called for in the 80s, right?
Yes. I think if you wanted someone to play a preppy yuppie type, he's got to be one of the first calls that you made during this period of time. But interesting career, obviously, the son of Kirk Douglas. He did not start off as an actor,
Oh
he
man.
was a producer. He won an Academy Award for co producing your second favorite movie of all time.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right, right. Which I feel like people realize now, but even when you read it, you're like, he won an Oscar for that. That's a good
Yeah.
Trivial Pursuit question. Like, which two
Mhm.
films did Michael Douglas win an Oscar for? It's tougher than you'd think. But yeah, this was the peak of his career. I remember hearing so much about this film and the legacy of this film years before I ever saw it. I probably didn't see this film till I was in high school. But of course, it was just so famous. Glenn Close's character was such an iconic movie villain, and you got all the jokes. If you thought one of your
Mhm.
friends was dating someone crazy, that someone would make a bunny boiler joke, or someone
Mhm.
would make a fatal attraction joke. I don't know that kids these days are still making jokes like that, but of course they were this would have been early 2000s probably when I saw this film. So it wasn't that old when I saw it. I would catch snippets of it here or there, and I finally saw it all the way through at some point in high school. And it had, like I said in the very beginning of this episode, it had been a while since I had seen it, at least 10 years. And then looking up this a bit more, lower Rotten Tomato score than I expected to see, 74%, which is, fine.
Yeah, it's all right. I think, there is so much to appreciate the movie, but there's also, I think, a bit of I will admit there's a bit of a bias lens there just because of the nostalgia feelings that it brings for the 90s. or the late 80s, really.
How many times have you seen this film?
Like a handful, like
Handful.
3 to
Okay.
4, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about the same for me. All right, let's talk about the production history. So this film screenplay is based on another shorter film called Diversion, which James Dearden, the screenwriter of this film, wrote and directed for British television in 1980. And before we were recording, Anton, I mentioned to you, I actually watched it this morning. I found it on YouTube.
Mhm. Yes.
It is very much a product of early 80s television. The production qualities aren't great. The acting isn't on the level of what you would see here. I'm not knocking the film. It's an interesting watch. If you're a fan of this film and you're into this sort of thing, I would recommend giving it a watch. It's 39 minutes. It is basically very, very close to what you see in this film up until the point where Alex commits or attempts to commit suicide.
Mhm.
And the film ends on a very ambiguous note, and it ends shortly after Alex's failed suicide attempt. So I guess what you would say here is this film is like just under 2 hours. I would say the final 45 minutes of this film are original to this film. They're not based on Dearden's screenplay from that one.
Mhm.
But Dearden adapted his own work. He got some help from Nicholas Meyer, who is best known for directing 2 of the Star Trek films, most notably The Wrath of Khan. Thought that was pretty cool. And the Paramount connection makes sense, right? Meyer also directed the 6th Star Trek film, The Undiscovered Country. Specifically, Meyer provided an official memo at the behest of the producers. They took his suggestions and they incorporated them into the script, one of which included a new ending. So basically, what
Mhm.
I gathered from this, Anton, was that they took the script from the original film made for TV. They recognized that it was incomplete and probably wouldn't work for the big screen. So they bring in Meyer to add what is more than likely the second half of the story. Ultimately, Meyer was asked to redraft the script on the basis of his suggestions, which ended up being the shooting script. Meyer went uncredited, though, which I found interesting because I don't even think this is a theory. If you really take the original film into account, Myers seems like he's responsible for almost the entire second half of this, but he still went uncredited. Maybe he didn't want to be. I don't know, but interesting.
Very interesting stuff.
John Carpenter was asked to direct this, but he turned it down as he felt it was too similar to Play Misty for Me. In fact, it was reported that more than 20 directors passed on this. Would you have wanted to see Carpenter direct this?
I would have been very interested. I mean, Carpenter, big name. I feel like very well respected in the field. What about yourself?
I think I'm happy with what we got, and knowing what I know about Carpenter, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who directs other people's projects. He
Mhm.
did his own stuff.
Yeah. And I feel like at the end of the day, of course, we got the product that we did, but always curious to think of the what if. Maybe it would have really put it up the notch with the jump scares. We got a few jump scares in this film, but
There's
I
a
think
few. Yeah, there's a few.
but there would have probably been a bit more had this been a true Carpenter film.
Now, here's an even more interesting what if for me, which is Brian De Palma was originally going to direct this. Once he signed on, that's what got Paramount to greenlight the film. But he refused to stay on the project unless he could replace Michael Douglas. This is
That's
fascinating.
it
So
would not
Michael
have been the
Douglas
same
was, yeah, right? It's like I could totally see De Palma making this. Like it makes sense. Like this seems like something that would be right up his alley. But for whatever reason, he did not want Douglas in the pro. Is Michael Douglas the protagonist? Sort of,
Kind of.
kind of.
He's just well, in the traditional sense, yes, he's the protagonist. Is he a hero? No.
He's definitely not a hero. Yeah, so De Palma, that's a movie I would want to see. De Palma's version of this. I don't think it would be better than this, but it would it'd be wild.
There'd be more guns.
Yeah, there's only one gun in this film, I think, right?
There's only one,
Yeah,
but there'd
just
be
one.
more.
A little
There'd be more.
revolver.
Yeah.
Sherry Lansing and Stanley Jaffe, the 2 producers of this, they had a loyalty to Michael Douglas, who was the first actor to express an interest in the part. And of course, he had producer experience himself. Now, to keep Douglas on the project, they fired Brian De Palma. They had feared that Paramount would cancel the project, but instead they merely delayed the start of production, which had, at the time of De Palma's departure, been only 10 weeks away. Here's the interesting part. They also opted to not tell Michael Douglas that De Palma didn't want him, for fear of wrecking his confidence.
Interesting.
Do you recognize the name Sherry Lansing?
I do not.
She would end up being the head of Paramount, becoming one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. She ran the studio from 1992 to 2004. Under her leadership,
I
Paramount
remember.
produced such hits as Forrest Gump, Braveheart, and what was at the time history's highest grossing film, Titanic, the latter two being a partnership with 20th Century Fox. 6 of the 10 highest grossing Paramount films were released during her tenure, which included 3 Academy Awards for Best Picture. So, pretty successful run for Sherry Lansing.
I did want to mention we have talked about Sherry on the show before, and
Yeah.
I'm remembering that now. And without Sherry, actually, there was a big influence from Sherry Lansing's part on incorporating Paramount into Paramount's Great America, the theme park here in California. So we have her to thank for more Star Trek in theme parks before Paramount pulled from the theme park.
Anything that leads to more Star Trek, I'm pro Star Trek, except for the TV show's on right now, but that's another story. So, no John Carpenter, no Brian De Palma. Adrian Lyne ended up being chosen to direct this. So, his previous works included 9.5 Weeks and Flashdance, the latter of which had been a massive box office hit in 1983. He had directed a couple other films, but those were his 2 most noteworthy ones. And here's a sidebar again for you. For anyone who laments that Brian De Palma didn't get to direct this, I think it ended up working out well for everyone, because I think Lyne did an awesome job with this. And that very same year, De Palma ended up making The Untouchables.
Yeah, everyone wins.
Yeah. Where are you on The Untouchables? You a fan?
Fantastic film.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. One of a kind.
Um,
Yeah. Should we cover that just for fun?
Oh, absolutely. That would be another, what do we call it? It would be a love fest.
It would be. I think I think you could throw darts at it, though. Namely,
Uh,
Robert De Niro's atrocious performance in it.
but I mean, baby carriage going down the stairs.
So good. I'm only half kidding about De Niro's atrocious performance.
Yeah.
I know. He is playing a cartoon character in that, though. I want him dead. I want his family dead. I want his house burned to the ground.
Now, was it the same character from Dick Tracy, perhaps?
It's not far off.
Not. It is really not.
And of course, that's the film that won Sean Connery his Oscar.
Yes. Iconic Untouchables. I like it a lot.
Oh, I love The Untouchables. Back to Fatal Attraction.
So the casting of Alex was quite complex, so let's try to run through it. Lansing and Jaff both had serious doubts about casting Glenn Close because they did not think she could be sexual enough for the role of Alex. Instead, they had many other actresses in mind for the role. Barbara Hershey was originally considered, but she wanted the role, but she was unavailable. Several actresses auditioned for the part, but they were almost all turned down. Lynn had French actress Isabelle Adjani in mind for the role. Kirstie Alley reportedly auditioned. Sharon Stone auditioned but was passed over, and she did get the opportunity to work with Michael Douglas 5 years later in Basic Instinct.
Sharon Stone could have done this.
Tracy Ullman was approached for the role, but she declined due to a scene in the script where the character boils a bunny. Miranda Richardson also turned it down as she found it, quote, hideous. Ellen Barkin, Deborah Winger, Susan Sarandon, Jessica Lange, Judy Davis, Melanie Griffith, and Michelle Pfeiffer were also considered. There's a dozen names you can read about that were allegedly considered, but we're not going to name them all, so definitely check out IMDb to see the list. Now, Close was persistent, and after meeting with Jaff several times in New York, she was asked to fly out to Los Angeles to read with Michael Douglas in front of Adrian Lyne and Lansing. Before the audition, she let her naturally frizzer hair go wild, and because she was impatient at putting it up. And she wore a slimming black dress she thought made her look, quote, fabulous to the audition. This impressed Lansing because Close, quote, came in looking completely different. Right away, she was into the part, end quote. Now, Close and Douglas performed a scene from early in the script where Alex flirts with Dan in a cafe, and Close came away, quote, convinced my career was over, that I was finished, and I had completely blown my chances, end quote.
This is on YouTube, by the way.
Yeah. No, it's a fun interview.
Yeah. No, I mean the footage of the rehearsal.
Oh, yes, that too. I mean, it's included kind of in the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the same
it's interesting.
feature.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Now, Lansing and Lynn were both convinced she was right for the role. Lynn stated that, quote, an extraordinary erotic transformation took place. She was this tragic, bewildering mix of sexuality and rage. I watched Alex come to life, end quote. And to prepare for the role, Close consulted several psychologists, hoping to understand Alex's psyche and motivations. She was uncomfortable with the bunny boiling scene, which she thought was too extreme. But she was assured on consulting the psychologist that such an action was entirely possible and that Alex's behavior corresponded to someone who experienced sexual abuse as a child. Filming took place from September to December 1986, with the ending reshot in July 1987. Filming was done almost entirely on location. According to Wikipedia, Douglas filmed this concurrently with Wall Street, but take that with a grain of salt. The filming schedules don't match. While filming her death scene, Close suffered a concussion and she wound up in the hospital, but she later found out that she was pregnant during filming. Interesting. And
Whoa.
Michael Douglas was the father. No, I'm just kidding.
Probably shouldn't have gotten on that roller coaster. More on that later.
Before Maurice Jarre was hired, John Barry was asked to do the score, but he was turned down because he was busy scoring The Living Daylights.
Thank goodness.
We're happy for it.
Oh, yeah.
Fatal Attraction received 6 nominations at the 60th Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Lynn, Best Actress for Close, and Best Supporting Actress for Archer, but failed to win any. And the film quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Close was quoted in 2008 as saying, quote, "Men still come up to me and say, 'You scared the shit out of me.' Sometimes they say, 'You saved my marriage,'" end quote. And that is the production history for Fatal Attraction.
Before we get into the discussion, we'll take a quick break as we hear from one of our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. And now let's talk about Fatal Attraction. Why wasn't it better? People are probably wondering why we're covering this. We just thought it would be fun.
Yeah.
We don't have an excuse.
Yeah, it's the right season for it.
It is.
And we love to talk about films that come from the era of, well, films that just aren't talked about as often these days.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably plenty of content on this film, but as far as our podcast goes, we have been neglecting the late 80s. We haven't done many films. We did Batman, we did The Abyss, but those might be the only ones from the late 80s that we've covered so far. So we're trying to hit that period of time. Generally speaking, when we do a season on the podcast, we try to hit films from just different periods of time. So that's one of the reasons why we're covering this.
Yeah. And if we were ever going to talk about a film from the late 80s that really is spooky, I mean, great choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was either this or Halloween 4.
Oh, I mean, this is going to be a lot more fun.
Yeah, we are going to do Halloween 3 in a couple weeks, though. Season of the Witch.
Yeah, that'll also be a different kind of fun.
Anton's like, yeah, I guess.
That'll be a different kind of fun. But
have you seen that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've seen all the Halloween films, and
it ain't great.
No, it's the least Halloween of the Halloween films.
At least it's original. I'll give it points for that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how when we talked about Halloween 2, I had my theory that originally it was going to be a series around the strange happenings during Halloween, and then it would be kind of like a film series around that, not necessarily a film series around Michael.
That's exactly right. That's what Carpenter wanted to do.
But, well, they realized where their bread was buttered.
I understand why they made the decision they did. I think we can save all this for the actual Halloween 3 episode, but you want to talk about some bad sequels? The Halloween sequels got old real quick.
Yeah. Real quick before we dive in more into Fatal Attraction, 87 was a really fun year for film. Did you ever watch Babette's Feast?
Long ago.
It is an awesome film.
It's a great movie.
Absolutely underrated. If there's ever chances to be able to let people know about it, this felt like the most organic way. So yeah, listeners, go check out Babette's Feast.
Yeah, I like the call out. 87 was a good year for films in general. You had this. RoboCop is one of my all-time favorite science fiction movies.
Mm-hmm.
You had Predator, you had Moonstruck, you had Lethal Weapon, you had The Last Samurai. No, The
We
Last
had
Emperor, The Last
The
Emperor.
Last Emperor. We had, of course, Wall Street.
Inner Space.
Ooh, Inner Space.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Broadcast News.
Classic.
Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank. That's all I remember. That's exhausted my
Nightmare on Elm
1987 knowledge.
Street. Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors.
Sure, yeah, of course. Who could
Cla-
forget that one?
Classic for
I'm more of
horror
a
film
Nightmare on Elm
fans.
Street 4 fan, but you know.
There are people that really do love that series.
Well, I think at least one of them is on our list to cover eventually.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Fatal Attraction. First reason why this wasn't better. Anton, have you seen the alternate ending?
Yes. The alternate ending is, it feels like a differently paced way to end this film.
For the listeners, I feel like this is pretty well known at this point. If you've seen Fatal Attraction, you like Fatal Attraction, I feel like you're probably aware that there was a different ending that they filmed. That was, I guess you could say, the original ending. The ending that you see in the theatrical version is technically the alternate. And just for some context, this isn't some secret. This is, of course, available on YouTube. The original ending had Alex committing suicide while dressed in that white dress. And Dan Gallagher ends up being arrested for her murder. The police think it's a murder. She makes it look like a murder. This was changed when preview audiences felt that Alex was not brought to justice. Apparently, this ending still appears on the Japanese release of the film.
On Laserdisc, too.
On Laserdisc.
Yeah, it was on the Laserdisc release.
This does explain the scene shortly before the climax of the film when he breaks into her apartment and he gives her the Spreewell. The old Latrell Spreewell when he chokes her out. And then he leaves the knife on the kitchen counter. And, you know, when he's backing out of the apartment, if you recall in the film, she's looking at the knife and then looking at him. And there's this crazy grin on her face. And it's like, okay, that makes sense for the original ending they were attempting. I just have to shout out to the Spreewell again, just giving her the Spreewell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Didn't put enough English on a
little more mustard on that.
Yeah,
on
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You should have put a little bit more mustard on kidnapping my daughter.
Oh, man.
But so anyway, in the alternate ending, she uses the knife to slit her own throat and she frames him because his prints are on the knife. Director Adrian Lyne, he did not want to film a new ending, but he agreed to it after Paramount put pressure on him. And apparently they also paid him an additional $1.5 million. So that's pretty good incentive if you're Adrian Lyne.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Not bad. Glenn Close was opposed to redoing the ending. She didn't like it. She didn't want to do it, but eventually she felt she owed it to everyone else to do it. And I think she was contractually obligated to as well. So again, there's some financial incentive there. In a 1996 interview with Movie Line magazine, Glenn Close said, quote, "The original ending was a gorgeous piece of film noir. She kills herself, but she makes sure that his prints are all over the knife and he gets arrested. He knows he didn't do it, but he's going to jail anyway. But audiences wanted some kind of cathartic ending, so we went back months later and shot the ending that's in the movie now," end quote. Where are you on this?
I actually really think the movie is better without the alternate ending. I just think that the way that it ends feels a bit more complete. I didn't like the way that Glenn Close's character just continues to escalate more and more. It felt like that was not a fitting end, but it kind of felt like, wow, like that was quite a bang to go out with in the way that was in the film, in the theatrical cut that we got. This alternate ending, it actually felt I don't know, like it felt like the pacing slowed down a bit as it's kind of going to the investigative portion of the ending, and it didn't have quite the same velocity for me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the alternate ending at all. I thought they absolutely made the right decision. Now, Adrian Lyne said the reason why Beth had to be the one to shoot Alex was because she was the sole innocent character in the entire story. I think that's pretty logical.
Yeah, I mean, her, the dog, the kids, poor rabbit.
Poor rabbit. Look, there's so many reasons why I think the theatrical ending is better. It's not only is it way scarier, it's just far more satisfying. I thought the alternate ending was lame. It was unexciting. It doesn't have you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, it's a lot slower. It's just not as exciting.
No. And the reason why I will defend the theatrical ending is that this film is really brilliantly directed by Adrian Lyne. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the tension goes up a level and another level and another level. And the ending is the result of all that escalation.
Yeah, and you know what? The more I think about it, the alternate ending feels like it's a backpedal,
Yeah.
and it just really slows down. And I agree with you 100%. So much escalation, and this film does a great job with that. It's a pretty long film, and it doesn't feel like it because it does a really good job of moving things forward, escalating point by point, and the next scene is even crazier than the last.
Did you feel that it was too long?
I felt like I think it was a little too long. Maybe more parts that were shot in Manhattan. There are a lot of extra shots shot in Manhattan. I got way too many scenes of Glenn Close making out with Michael Douglas in an elevator lift.
Well, that was only one scene.
It was way too long.
I know what you mean. I actually, I think I disagree. I thought it was really well paced on the last rewatch.
Yeah, I mean, it was like certain scenes like Glenn Close and Michael Douglas running around in the park with their dog, him
Actually,
pretending
okay, okay,
him pre-
I'm with you on
him
that.
him pretending to like, oh, like I've passed out. Actually, I didn't. Look how much fun we're having. It's like you didn't really need this long of an establishing shot to show to kind of show that I don't know, prove a point that she could grow personal attachment because of their connection over the weekend. There was just too much of that.
Did she actually have personal attachment, or did she just think she did?
I will go with the latter.
That was shot like a MetLife commercial,
Oh, absolutely.
where she's just like,
They're just
"Yeah,
running through the park. The dog's just off leash.
bring the dog. I'm a great cook.
Oh,
I love
I love
animals."
that's the most underrated line in the film for sure.
That is directly from Diversion.
That is
Now,
great.
before I forget,
If she was holding a pot while saying that, that's a great Chekhov's gun.
she's just like, interesting though. It's from Diversion. That line exactly. She's like, "Oh, I'm a great cook. I love animals. Bring your dog." They don't do anything with it though in Diversion, and in here they take those words and they really make them come back later. That might have been Nicholas Meyer. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get into the character discussions in the next reason, but back to the ending really quick. I could see someone not liking it because it is a very classic horror movie type of finale, but it is so well executed and so iconic that I don't care. It's
Mm-hmm.
so well directed. You think you're going to see Alex in the mirror when Beth first closes it, but it's a fake out. And then you see her when she wipes away the steam, and it's a great jump scare. I was on the edge of my seat the first time I watched this movie, especially during the ending.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I even watched the film is because I really love. Well, I have a deep appreciation for Michael Douglas, and this was one that I hadn't seen for the longest time. And people said, "Oh, you got to watch Fatal Attraction," and it really reminds me of. I love the film Misery. Talk about another film with like an obsessive
Yeah.
female antagonist. Very different films, but very similar. Very similar themes. And I think that in the same way that you have just like an obsessive character, like Glenn Close just kind of played that to a T here.
Well, let's get into it then, because she's the second reason that we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
She's a brilliant actor.
Mm-hmm.
I think her performance in this film is nothing short of amazing. It's one of the most famous screen performances of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the ones that when you see it, you're not let down at all. You're not disappointed. It's not overrated at all.
Yeah.
It is worthy of all the infamy that it has.
It's worth the hype. Now,
Oh, yeah.
the way the character was written, does it surprise you there were so many actresses that declined this role?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. When your character murders a rabbit and like
Mhm.
puts it in a pot on a stove, there's not a lot of actors, male or female, that are going to want to do that.
No. And even then, like, in the same way that there's, of course, subtext or basically the wrong message can be taken by a film, there's been a lot of arguments, right? And people have written about it online with what does the film say about women? Now, of course, it doesn't speak for all women, but it definitely, I will say this, it definitely makes me think, okay, one, I'm always want to be faithful, of course, and two, stay away from crazy people.
Does she have the craziest crazy eyes you've ever seen in a movie?
They're just really, I mean, her and Skeletor for their sunken in look.
Even from the very first scene where you see her in the Japanese restaurant at that party, I mean, her eyes are just dancing all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, she and I think like that's speaks to just her performance. Like she's able to use her eyes to tell a story in that she's crazy.
Do you have a hard time buying that Dan Gallagher would fall for her? Can I
Man,
answer my own question while I wait for you to formulate your thoughts?
please.
Okay. I would say when I first saw this when I was younger, my first reaction to it is like, well, Ann Archer's way better looking than her. Why would Michael Douglas fall for her? Because, full disclosure, and I don't think this is a hot take at any point, I don't find Glenn Close attractive in any way, shape, or form.
No,
But now that I'm older and that I am married and that I know other married couples and the complexities of marriage, I'm not condoning Dan Gallagher's behavior in any way. But what I will say is this: infidelity is not based on looks solely.
not always.
A lot of people cheat simply because of availability. It happens all the time. He did not cheat on Beth because he thought Alex was better looking than his wife. That's
No,
not why he cheated on her.
he says as much. He even says he's very happy.
Right.
It was just a one-time thing. He didn't want any attachment. So I will say it was probably more. He was probably more into the thrill of it more than actually wanting to pursue Glenn Close as like a romantic partner.
Oh, he definitely did not want to pursue her as a romantic partner. We know
Yeah.
we know that for sure.
I wonder what gave that away.
Well, there's that's why this movie's so fascinating. There's so much discussion that you could have about this subject.
There was really, it was something really interesting I read on like a Reddit thread where if you look at Fatal Attraction, the time period, and kind of tie it with like there was like the big cocaine boom in the late 80s, one could almost look at it as like it's really interesting. One could almost look at it as kind of the a story on a yuppie and the dangers of cocaine and how that can impact home life
Or
and
AIDS.
or AIDS. I could totally see it.
Yeah.
I saw the cocaine connection, like her being a metaphor for her representing cocaine, just because she also wears a lot of white in this film.
And she's a blonde.
Yeah,
And she looks like someone who would do cocaine.
she looks like she's just been snorting a lot of cocaine.
Well, we know she does Oreos and Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah,
Did you notice the Haagen-Dazs on her
a lot
bed?
of all the Haagen
Yep.
Dazs.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, and then the other thing that kind of for me, I was like, well, maybe this is a bit on the nose. Was really early on in the film, like Michael Douglas gets some white stuff on his nose, and she
Oh, the
makes the
cream
motion.
cheese
Oh, that was it. The cream cheese.
from
Okay.
the bagel.
Yeah, from the bagel. Yeah, and she just kind of points, and I'm like, oh, so she is cocaine.
Whereas Bruce Willis in Die Hard would say, "You missed a spot." Yeah, Glenn Close, what a legend for this role.
Yeah.
I respect her for this. She fully committed to this role. But getting back to the discussion of it all, like why would Dan cheat on his wife with this person? She ends up being a monster, right? But it's like
Mm-hmm.
you can see why he ends up doing it. She makes him feel sexy. She charms him. It's like the twisted evil version of Sex in the City. Like this is like evil Carrie Bradshaw.
I can see that. Thrilling, exciting, something, the thrill and excitement that he's not getting in his life, he's able to kind of get that with this weekend tryst, despite how unethical it is.
Yeah, like when she goes full crazy, you can see it. Like I'm going to say it a couple times probably on this episode, but like this movie is a great one to watch a couple different times because
Mhm,
once you
mhm,
know everything about her and who she is after you've seen this movie the first time,
mhm.
rewatching it is even more satisfying because you can see it's all there the whole time, just bubbling under the surface.
Oh, yeah. The way she looks at everything, the way that she's giving her facial expressions, I think, are very underrated in this film just because whether it's the subtle exchanges of hugging him at his office when he first says this is goodbye, where you're like, nope, this is not goodbye.
I'm not going to be ignored. That's the real famous line from this. I think that was in the trailer.
Yeah, she is crazy.
But it's all the little stuff too. And like, look, we can have this discussion now. How did she not win the Oscar for this?
That is so hard. Look, I'll say this. I really love Cher in Moonstruck.
I love Moonstruck. I love Cher in Moonstruck.
There's a lot of amazing things about that. I think that the fact that Cher also just traditionally not an actor and really put on an amazing performance. So I don't want to take away from Cher, like I would say, like earning her win. But Glenn Close, like absolutely, like killed it in this
She should have won.
performance.
This is this is the preeminent, most iconic female performance from 1987.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're this is how you know who she should have won the Oscar. Anton, if I'm asking you, like, point blank, gun to your head, what's the best female performance from 1987? It's this.
Who's this?
It's this. Again, nothing against Cher either. I'm with you. I love her in Moonstruck, but you're just looking at the Oscar nominations. You're like, how'd this get shut out?
Part of it was probably Cher for Moonstruck was bigger for the Academy.
Yeah. This is also a complicated performance in some ways.
This is also not a traditional kind of film that would win at the Oscars.
No, it's not. Parts of this movie are like watching a slasher film.
It's a psycho thriller. It's
Yeah.
exactly in that category.
And again, I know Wikipedia doesn't call it a horror movie, but I think I would. It's a suburban yuppie horror movie.
Yeah, so part of what's interesting when we think of like the psycho thriller subgenre compared to like I do think of it like it's in the subgenre of horror. It's that psychological aspect.
Yeah.
There's traditionally, of course, the film Psycho. When we kind of think of that, there's always a kind of this component that is just terrifying because you have some character that doesn't have any semblance of what's logical. And so I think with that, it's terrifying to see Glenn Close's character just go on and on, escalate, just doing things that terrify us because it makes no sense.
I was so terrified when she ruined the Volvo station wagon.
Oh my gosh.
What a great car.
Classic car.
What do you think about this Alex is the victim narrative on the internet?
I'm not into it.
No.
It's
No.
It's very clear that those are folks romanticizing a character that boiled a bunny.
And kidnapped a child and committed a home invasion and tried to murder people. Yeah. She's not the victim.
Not the victim. Now, is Michael Douglas's character a hero?
Absolutely not. No.
So in the same way, you can't call Alex a victim, nor can you call the main character a hero. But
that's why this movie's so interesting.
It is. It is
very subversive.
And I feel like I could see why maybe people would want to say her character is the victim, but I think I don't buy it.
Here's what I would say. She's definitely not a victim. You do slightly feel bad for her, like 2%, because this was an era when mental health was not taken nearly as seriously as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And she's clearly mentally ill. And you're like, wow, like in today's society, you'd like to think that she would get some help. Hang on one second.
Yep.
Where were we at?
We were just talking about mental health and how in this day and age, this character would have gotten a lot more mental health support. But back then, looked at very differently.
Very different situation. One thing, though, I think this film was a little bit ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. So when the scene where she's trying to call him repeatedly, I was hinting at this earlier. She's on her bed, desperately dialing his number. She's surrounded by Oreos, Haagen-Dazs, Doritos, and has a glass of wine. Nailed it.
Also, the exasperation of how she ends each call, just slamming the phone or ripping it out of the wall. You can't really get that with phones nowadays. No one really has rotary phones or landlines anymore. So I think it's just a really interesting prop to display emotion that is, not really of this time anymore.
Even my parents don't have a landline anymore.
Did you ever have a rotary phone in your house?
No.
Yeah, no, we didn't have one either. I think it was
my grandmom had one though.
Yeah.
I remember this was in like the mid 90s. I was a little kid and she still had a rotary phone and I went to like use the phone for something and I remember being like,
what do I do here?
What is this?
Yeah, and any young listeners really have no idea what we're talking about with rotary phones.
They sucked. There's no point in going back.
But
the one thing, though,
props.
Something I like to point out about old school landlines is that they were not connected to the power grid. So when the power went out, you could still use a phone if it had a cord.
So if you're ever going to learn anything from this podcast, folks, stay off the grid.
Stay off the grid if you can. Here's a question for you, Anton. Do you think Alex was actually pregnant?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
I don't. I really don't.
It's a wonderful screenwriting thing that the film does by not answering it, though.
It was still like pretty early in the film. I think you're maybe about 45 minutes, close to an hour into the film. And it's that escalation point that really takes it from, can I trust this character as someone that's a jilted lover to, wait, she's insane, isn't she? because she's
because
clearly just trying to trap him.
she was, yeah, I think she was definitely trying to trap him because the thing, although I think I talked myself out of, who knows, but I was wondering, like, okay, if she was pregnant, why would she get on a roller coaster? And then I was like, oh, well, she's also crazy, so that
Yeah.
wouldn't have stopped her.
And like we said, it's just a character doing illogical things, and it terrifies us because we want to find the logic in what they're doing, but it's not understandable.
No.
I mean, even for her character, like why Michael Douglas? Like why a married man? They're in the city of like millions of people, of course, but she's got problems.
Yeah, I would say having lived very close to New York and working in New York for years, it is one of the easier places to date. One of the things I wondered about her character is this cannot be the first guy she's done this to.
No.
It's like you're telling me she singled out Michael Douglas's character. It can't be the first time.
It would have been a very different film if there were hints of that. Like that
Yeah.
she's like
I'm
a
glad they don't address
serial.
it actually.
Yeah, if it was like a serial relationship, like obsessive character, you kind of get that a bit more with So I Married an Axe Murderer,
Yes. Very different film, but yes.
but very different, but kind of similar themes of is the person I'm with crazy?
Ultimately, this film works because you get all three actors, the principals, right? It's Glenn Close, Michael Douglas, and Ann Archer. All three of them are brilliant. They
Mhm.
make you believe their characters. I mean, even the actress who played the little daughter, she was good.
Mhm.
If you look at this story on paper, it's nothing special. You're like, a guy cheats on his wife, and the woman that he cheats with goes crazy and tries to kill him. That's like a Lifetime movie, right? It's like
Yeah.
something you'd see on like A&E or something. Like, there's a throwback for you,
Um,
A&E. It's nothing special, right? But it's the acting and the way the characters are written that make the difference.
yeah, I would not be able to take I feel like if you watch a film like this on Lifetime, it wouldn't do as great of a job of building up the tension
No.
and really showing this as a thriller, as a horror film, because the close-ups of the faces that we get here, there are a lot of terrifying faces in this film. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to Michael Douglas in a second, but her and Douglas have sizzling chemistry. Like, you really feel it
Yeah.
during that where they're getting drinks and it turns into dinner right before they hook up for the first time. It's on a Saturday, right?
Hmm. It was very believable, their tension and
Yeah,
their
it's great
electricity.
dialogue. She's really stroking his ego, and you can feel it. She's roping him in, where she's just like, what does he say? It's not a crime to have dinner with someone. She's like, not yet.
Not yet.
And then, do you remember when he lights her cigarette with the match?
Mhm.
She makes him hold the match for a really long time before she actually lights her cigarette. And it's like she's just testing him.
I mean, it's from the moment that he's waiting out in the rain and she just takes his hand.
Well, I want to get to that in a second because I caught something on the last rewatch that I had never noticed before related to that. Remind
Mhm.
me and we'll come back to that.
All right.
Before we close out the Glenn Close reason, did you ever see her appearance on Saturday Night Live shortly after this film's release?
This is pretty great.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love how she embraced it.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, folks. So give it a watch.
Yeah.
We'll just butcher it if we describe it. Just watch it.
It's very funny. Okay, now let's get to Michael Douglas. He is a legend. This is one of his most famous roles. I do think it's an underrated Douglas performance.
I don't think it's my favorite
It's not
Douglas
my favorite.
performance, but it's good. It's not bad. What is your favorite like Michael Douglas films?
I mean, it's hard not to say Wall Street, but it's actually
Mhm.
not Wall Street.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I like him in a couple different things. I really like him in Ghost in the Darkness, even though it's not his best performance. I like
Mhm.
him in Black Rain, even though it's not his best performance. I like him in Traffic.
Yep.
I actually like him in Disclosure. I'm naming like not great movies. I realize that.
I loved him in The Game.
That's probably his best. That's probably my favorite Michael Douglas performance because again, he's playing the rich yuppie.
There's so much about that film. Like that's definitely in like my like top 10 films is The Game. It's such a unique film.
Of all time.
Yeah, it is such a unique film.
Should we cover that?
Oh, I would love to because it doesn't get enough love nowadays, but it's
No.
it's an incredible Fincher film.
Also, incredible San Francisco film.
Oh yeah, love that. And you
Yeah.
know I love me some San Francisco films.
Oh, I know you do. That's why we covered Towering Inferno. Just kidding.
Yeah.
No, Michael Douglas, Romancing the Stone is up there for me.
Where do you think Ant-Man sits in that list?
I don't hate Ant-Man. I actually like him in Ant-Man.
I would have liked to have seen maybe like a MCU with Michael Douglas in his heyday as Ant-Man. They did that de-aging in the film, so we kind of
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. I wouldn't call him a great actor, but he was a great movie star, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. He fit this role, that the archetype, the strong jawline actor that that really reminds me of Hollywood actors of the golden age. I mean, of course, it makes sense. He's Kirk Douglas's son.
Yeah. This is probably going to be an unpopular choice, but I actually really liked him in the Wall Street sequel, Money Never Sleeps.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, I think it's because I think I saw parts of that film. I always thought him and Charlie Sheen were related.
They're not far off some of their behavior in films.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. All right, well, let's get into him as Dan Gallagher. The reason why I say this role is underrated, I think, between Glenn Close's performance and him playing Gordon Gekko the same year, I think people overlook this film for him. It's a more difficult part to play than you would think on paper because he has to be the protagonist, like we said, but not the hero, like we said.
Mm-hmm.
There are not many actors that can actually pull that off because you can't really root for him, but you can't root against him at the same time.
I mean, we've seen lots of films with morally ambiguous main characters. It's not uncommon.
No, but this morally ambiguous character has a family that you do have to root for because you're
Right.
rooting for the family, or at least I would. I think most
Right.
people
No,
would
I
be.
think most people would be, and I feel like I totally agree. That is a really interesting wrinkle that makes this film unique.
He's not a scumbag,
Not in the traditional sense.
not traditionally.
Does scummy things.
Very scummy things. But he has to be somewhat sympathetic, and Michael Douglas actually pulls this off. Terrible husband. He cheats on his wife. He takes
Yep.
no responsibility for his actions. Here's the thing I wanted to bring up earlier. Because you were like, oh, when she takes his hand
Mm-hmm.
and they jet off in the rain to the bar where they eventually have dinner and then they end up hooking up afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice this? He is the one who initiates it, though.
Do you want? Yeah, he tells her, "Do you want to
It's
grab a drink to
Yes,
wait
it's
to wait
very
this out?"
easy to
Yeah.
miss. Yeah, when he can't get his umbrella to
yeah,
work
no,
in the pouring rain, he asks her if she wants to get a drink.
It was very clear watching the film. He invites Sis into his life.
For whatever reason, I missed that the first 3 or 4 times I saw this film. I finally noticed it on the rewatch. I was like, it's him.
Played himself,
He could have just gotten a cab and gone home, but he didn't.
but he didn't.
I think it's a brilliant screenplay too from James Dearden and brilliant direction from Adrian Lyne. A lesser film would have set things up where you feel bad for him, like oh, his wife is nagging him, his wife is a bitch, his wife's being mean to him. A lesser film would give him an excuse to cheat on his wife, but this one doesn't. She's great. She's a wonderful wife. He has this not a perfect life because nobody has a perfect life, but he has a great life.
Yeah, it's a very like happy home life. His wife's beautiful. They're very well off.
Yeah,
and
he's about to make partner at a law firm.
It also begs that question, just like logically, why would you do this?
When I first saw this film, I was probably 15 or 16, and like obviously based on the film's content, I was old enough to see it, right? It wasn't inappropriate for a 16-year-old, but this is a film really for adults where when you're married and you're older, you really appreciate and understand all the things going on in this film, and you realize like when I watched this the other week, you're like, man, he just commits adultery because he could and because he wanted to. That's it. You're like, that's just sad.
It is just really sad. If there's ever been like a film that just kind of tells on that really speaks to the dangers of infidelity, this is
the extreme.
Yeah, this is the extreme. This and what is it? Unfaithful. Those are extremes.
Another Adrian Lyne movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one had a Richard Gere killing someone with a snowball.
Yeah. And then they just have a happy life, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, Adrian Lyne, he does mostly one type of movie. Yeah, he's like, does it involve eroticism and thrills? I'm in. I will say this, and why I don't think Alex is some kind of a victim. Now, while what he is doing by committing adultery is awful and a sin and all that, he is honest with her about like, he's like, I am married. We can't go anywhere. This is not going to work out between us long term. It's not a defense of what he's doing, but it's like, he is upfront with Alex about what the expectations are, at least what he thinks the expectations are. Now, where he screws up, apart from committing adultery to begin with, is he goes back to see Alex on the second day, which I assume is Sunday, right?
Right.
She calls him, and if you remember, she calls him after Beth calls him from, it looks like they're somewhere on Long Island, I think, at her parents' house
Yeah,
or
they're like
some.
maybe they're somewhere in what is it, in Jericho, New York, who knows.
Yeah, it was several hours away though. So Beth calls him, they catch up. She's like, "Hey, what did you do last night?" He's like, "Oh, I had dinner with my friend." He just bullshits his way through it.
Mhm.
And then Alex calls him. And if you remember from the film, from the look on his face, he's freaked out. He's like, "What?" He doesn't know how she got the number. That's something else the film doesn't address. If you remember this,
Mhm.
did he leave her his I don't think he leaves her his number. So she did some
That's
machinations to
true.
get his phone number, if you think about it. Now, it wouldn't have been that
Yeah.
hard because she worked at the firm that his firm was working with her. It wouldn't have been hard, but the fact is, she looks up his number and calls him. He's freaked out a little bit. And she's like, "I woke up and you weren't there. I hate that. I thought we were going to spend the day together." It's just like all these red flags are going off. He tries to make some lame excuse, but he eventually caves and he sees her again, and he's a complete moron for doing so. That's where he screws up. I think if he had blown her off, she probably would have let it go.
I think that we're thinking a bit too, and this is where I feel like the film fits into this category. We're trying to think a bit too logically here. She is so damn persistent.
You're probably right. But he
Because
didn't have to. This is the thing. It's
yeah,
like you could try to make the excuse for him the day before. It was a spur of the moment thing. But this one, she sets him up and he's just like, "Oh, I have to walk the dog." And then that's when she says that line, like, "Oh, I love animals. Like, I'm a great cook."
I'm a great cook. But I think that if she was already willing to go through such depths to like get his number and call him, if she had, even if he had said no, everything that she has done in the film subsequently, we know that she would have gone to great lengths to continue to make his life hell.
Probably. I think he had an opportunity to move on though, and he just instead of just taking a right, he took a left and just hit the gas.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Because is it the
Yeah.
is it the second day where she tries to kill herself? Is that
Yeah.
same day?
Yeah, same day.
Okay. So they go from frolicking around in Central Park to I'm slashing my wrists.
And he's just like, what have I gotten myself into?
And then, oh man, there's just this film is a masterpiece of escalation. I remember the first time I saw this film, the oh shit moment for me is when he comes home and she's in the apartment with Beth. You're just like, oh shit.
Shakes his hand for a little too long.
You can see the scar on her wrist.
It is.
And she's just like, "Oh, you're moving out? You're moving to the country?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, we're moving to Bedford. Do you know?" And she's like, "Oh, it's so nice there." The
Yeah.
look on Michael Douglas's face. That's what I mean, man. Like this is an underrated performance. His acting is so good in that scene.
Yeah, he looks like he's been punched in the gut.
Yeah, not even the gut. It looks like he looks like he just got hit in the balls.
Yeah.
Just I'm telling you, man, like there are not many actors who can do that scene. The look on his face, it's like he's horrified, but he can't show it, and he's trying to act his way through it. And she's just like, "Oh yeah, I just told Alex we're moving." And he's like, and remember she messes with him. She's like, "Haven't we met before?" And he's like, "No." And she's like, "No, we have at that Japanese restaurant
Yeah,
at
I
the
love
Rising
how
Sun party."
yeah, I love how she can really she's a chameleon, right? Because she's able to really, turn on the charm when she needs to.
Oh
But
yeah.
then when she's at his office and like with his buddy, his colleague, he's like, I think we've seen each other before. He's like, nope.
Ice cold.
Yeah. To me, seeing that, I was like, she's nuts.
But here's the thing about Douglas's character. And it's like, again, it's like, this is one of the most rewatchable movies I think we've ever covered on this podcast. I'm so glad we decided to do it. And I thank you, Anton, I think you pushed for this. You're like, we should do this
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about just films from this era that were really fun. I was like, ooh, Michael Douglas, Fatal Attraction.
He doesn't really express any kind of remorse until Beth gets into the car crash. I didn't even notice that until the latest rewatch. Like when he first confesses to the affair, he gives her that Bill Clinton apology. "I'm sorry I got caught" kind of thing. Like, "Oh, I guess I'll just admit to this since I can't figure out another way out of this." Here's the question for you. The movie doesn't show anything to indicate it, but Do you wonder if this is the first time Dan has cheated on Beth?
Oh, now that is an interesting question. Based on the way that he acts, it kind of feels like it's not.
I don't think so either. I do think this is the first time Beth finds out.
One of those better left, or it's better that the film never addressed it because it kind of speaks more volumes to the nuance of his character.
Because when he actually ends up cheating on her, right, which is, I think we can both agree, it's the second he asks Alex for a drink, right? It's not when he actually sleeps with her. It's before that. Emotional infidelity, right? Emotional adultery. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
I feel like both of us are married. We married men who take their marriages seriously. You're not asking some woman that you sort of work with out for a drink on a Saturday afternoon while your wife's away. You're not doing that.
No, that's just uncomfortable for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. But the reason why I think he's done it before is it doesn't seem like a difficult decision for him. He makes it really flippant and casual and let's get a drink.
And the way that, I mean, you even said it, it establishes that he's the one pushing for it.
When he comes clean to Beth, it does make you wonder. She's like, "Oh, did you have an affair with her?" And she doesn't seem that mad until he says that she's pregnant, and she freaks out. Understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But you still root for them because of the family. You're not rooting for Dan, but I think it's a brilliance of this movie that you're watching the movie and you're like, I hope they stay together, or at least I was. I'm going to change the subject slightly.
Okay.
Michael Douglas won the Triple Crown in 1987. Hear me out. He is the lead actor in the highest grossing film of the year. He wins the Oscar for playing Gordon Gekko. He also won the Golden Globe. That is a Triple Crown.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic.
Pretty rare. Now, if you want to say a directorial Triple Crown, Steven Spielberg in 1993, he had Jurassic Park and Schindler's List, which is maybe not a Triple Crown, but it's my example, so I can use whatever data I want.
There has to be something for Tobey Maguire to win the MTV Movie Award for Best Kiss. In this,
that's like winning a Golden Globe, right?
That's like winning a Golden Globe.
No, but I don't know how to easily look this up, and maybe I could use ChatGPT. But how many actors do you think have accomplished that? Where they're like they win an Oscar, they win a Golden Globe, and they're in the highest grossing film of the year, but it's a separate film.
Yeah, no, that
ain't Forrest
a
Gump.
good call. Yeah, it ain't. Well, this is something I want to take a look at because that is a really fun category.
Right? It's like Michael Douglas. This is the maybe the best example we've ever seen on this podcast of a true career year. Like this is Shaq winning the title, winning Finals MVP, winning MVP, and winning All-Star MVP in 2000.
I was gonna say, but if we're thinking at different category, he also wins defensive MVP.
Oh, like Jordan in '88, like
exactly.
MVP and Defensive Player of the Year.
I think for me that kind of is a very that's like close, like that would be a really interesting like comparison because you're winning across categories, right?
Yeah,
with different skills.
It's interesting. Like Douglas probably wasn't even. No, Michael Douglas definitely wasn't even the biggest movie star in the world in the late 80s, but yet he had this career year. He had a year that Arnold Schwarzenegger never had. I'm not comparing him to Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't even know where I'm going with this, so let's move on to the next reason.
Okay.
Which is just general thoughts on the production. Anne Archer received the only other acting Oscar nomination for this role. She is incredible in this film, and it makes me wonder why her career wasn't bigger than it was. Her acting's so good in some, like the scene where Dan confesses to the affair and then where she goes to pick up Ellen from school and she finds out, like when that teacher, she's like, "Oh, did you forget something?" And you just see the panic on her face.
Yeah, it's she's really the only true like good character in this film.
She's the hero.
Yeah, she's the true hero.
Also, how bad were schools back then? Like how irresponsible. Anyone could just pick up anybody's kid.
The way you hear some older generations talk about it, that was better though.
Actually, I was thinking about this. I'm pretty sure when I was in elementary school, anyone's parent could have picked me up if I got in the car with them. I don't think they checked that stuff. Even in this is in the 90s. And
yeah, it was the time of kids were just walking home from school on their own, or at least that's what people say all the time.
Actually, I think this is a very obvious answer. I think Columbine is what changed all that.
Yeah,
I think
that's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anne Archer, she was in this film. I think she was in a couple other high-profile movies. She was in the Harrison Ford, Jack Ryan movies, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger. But she wasn't in a ton of stuff. And I wish I had looked into this more because She is amazing in this film. She was deservedly nominated for Best Supporting Actress. You could probably make the case she should have won. Another Moonstruck won or shut her out, Olympia Dukakis. But Beth Gallagher is one of the most underrated badass characters in a movie. She completely backs her shit up. I love her character. The more I see this movie, the more I appreciate her character. When she stone colds Alex on the phone,
Yep.
this is Beth Gallagher. If you come near my family again, I'll kill you.
Yeah. And especially for a character that was a bit sidelined during the first half of the film, it could have easily made her character more a victim in the background. But really, Ann Archer was able to turn this character into someone that took the bull by the horns here.
Yeah. The ending is so good. It's so satisfying. The girl who plays Ellen, did you notice she played Ruby Sue in Christmas Vacation 2 years later?
Oh,
Randy Quaid's little daughter?
Yep. Yeah, interesting.
We're just going through reasons here. I have Alex Forrest foolishly violates one of life's cardinal rules: never bring a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah, she another example of not being so logical.
No. This is just for you and Tyler and for the 200 other people who listened to our episode on Rising Sun. But the opening party at the Japanese restaurant gave me real Rising Sun vibes.
I love that. Just because so true, and also in like very much in that same timeline, Japanese economic boom. So of course there's a reference of like a Japanese zaibatsu somehow.
They're taking over our real estate. Oh no.
Yeah.
I loved seeing late 80s New York City. So grimy, but there's such a charm to it.
Yeah, and there was, they showed a lot of the grimy shots, but they also just showed a lot of beautiful shots of Manhattan. Like, I feel like Central Park, of course, is iconic, but there are a few areas in there where, even today I'm like, wow, like that, like, what was the meatpacking districts in the movie?
Yes.
Five Eyes in there. I feel like a lot hasn't changed, but a lot has changed. And the one thing that really, really hasn't changed, and you can't have a New York movie without it, is all the scaffolding.
Yes. Yes.
Tons of scaffolding.
I love Alex's apartment, the white brick. It's I was trying to figure out what that apartment would cost in today's money. It's
$5,000 apartment.
Yeah, easily. Dan and Beth's place too that they sell, like that's a nice place. You know what it kind of reminded me of? Tom Cruise's and Nicole Kidman's place in Eyes Wide Shut.
They had like a brownstone though, right?
I think it was an apartment.
Okay.
But that was also Stanley Kubrick's London interpretation of New York, so who knows? Yeah, I mean, this movie, the meatpacking district is not the trendy neighborhood that it was in 1987, but really cool to see that. I just have in my notes shoulder pads.
Yep, that was what was it? Disclosure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disclosure was probably what killed off shoulder pads. 1994, they were like, we can't have these anymore.
We can't have, because there were some really strong shoulder pads in that movie.
There were. This movie, I think they were more appropriate. I like Dan's attire throughout the film. I really like that gray plaid blazer that he's wearing when he goes to the Saturday morning meeting.
Yeah, very iconic 80s, just everywhere you're going looking good with a blazer look.
But timeless too. Like you could wear that now and it would look okay.
The checkered patterns, remember those?
Yeah. He had like a long sleeve black polo underneath, which is, again, you could pull that off now.
Yeah.
This film makes me want to drink wine. There's a lot of wine in this.
Yes, there is.
And we mentioned the Volvo station wagon.
There's a lot of sushi in this film.
There is. Yeah, sushi. I remember I think the first movie to feature sushi that I was aware of was like The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, and even then it was just kind of a joke.
It would have been a niche in the 80s. Yeah. But I think in New York, it would have been different.
It would be trendy and cool and hip.
Yeah. Watching this now, I really liked how it was shot. The director of photography was a guy named Howard Atherton. I think he did a really nice job. It's shot like an 80s movie, like Tony Scott would have filmed it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of soft lighting. But I love the grain, like the film grain. It's shot like an old school, like commercial in a good way.
I think, and it's kind of meant to, because we've talked a lot about how this film's very subversive. Let's think about it. The film there's a lot of like a majority of this film is shot in the day. Michael Douglas's character is having an affair in the open in the day. The antagonist is wearing white in the film a lot.
And a leather jacket.
And a leather jacket. And the fact that the film doesn't kind of stray away from that we have these characters like openly doing unethical things in a very like, soft lens, in a very like, in a light that doesn't kind of put it strikingly in that category of like this is a thriller. It really does kind of put the mindset of the viewer in like a very different headspace. Like what we're seeing actually should kind of feel more like a home movie, or it should feel a bit more like a, maybe even just like a comedy drama, just with the way that the tone of the actual shots are being set as. But it's a thriller, no doubt.
It's edited like a thriller too, which I really enjoyed. Did you recognize the name Michael Kahn?
Didn't catch it.
Okay, so he was the co-editor on this film, and I knew from the credits. I'm like, I know that name from somewhere. He's Steven Spielberg's editor,
Oh, okay.
and I'll give you. I mean, no big deal, but I mean,
Yeah.
he's won Oscars for editing Raiders of the Lost Ark, Schindler's List,
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan. No big deal.
Yeah, just that guy.
Yeah, and you can it, and this is I know you. I think I actually agree with your point. Like some of the stuff in Central Park probably could have been trimmed out, but one of the things that struck me on the latest rewatch of I did like the pacing. It does feel like a modern film. I don't feel like this was paced too slowly like a lot of 80s movies or 70s movies that we might end up watching. It is under 2 hours, this film, and I think for the most part, I would say 90% of this film is cut like anything you'd see today, and that's why I think it holds up really well. Bunny boiler scene, it delivers.
It is a lot, and it is horrifying, and
Every bit of effective now as it was then.
yeah, it is shocking. For people that haven't seen the film, it is, like we said, there's a reason why there's a lot of people that wouldn't say yes to play a character that does that.
I was trying to think, my wife and I were talking about this, like not even just the rabbit alone, but imagine if you came home and you know that no one's supposed to be there, and you see something like boiling on your stove, you're immediately like, what?
Yeah.
And then it ends up being your pet rabbit.
Well, it could have been a commercial for late McDonald's. It's like, well, let's just go get some takeout.
You were talking about stuff you would cut out of this film. I felt like the sex scenes were a lot.
They're gratuitous and weird.
I don't think I needed to see Michael Douglas sucking on Glenn Close's nipples. I don't ever need to see that again.
No, and I don't think that we never really got like too much of Michael Douglas doing that in the other films that we see.
Oh, you mean not like Basic Instinct, where we get way too much of that? You forgot about that one, didn't you?
I think no, I was blocking it out of my mind.
Okay, I was gonna say Basic Instinct is worse than this.
Yeah.
Somehow. Well, look, she had to do the dishes, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I texted this to you last night because you were like, "Oh, I need to find a stream of this movie," and I was like, "Well, it's on YouTube and Netflix, but on YouTube it's like edited." So when I first watched this on YouTube, I didn't know that it was edited, and they cut the sex scene out, and I was like, "Cool, great."
It's way more comfortable.
Don't have to fast forward through that. Yeah. We talked about the ending already. It's like a slasher movie, but I think in a great way. It's just so iconic. Even before that, when she follows him home after she throws the acid on his Volvo and ruins just a beautiful car. By the way, if I could find a Volvo station wagon from that era in good condition, I'd buy it.
Yeah, low mileage. It's still running. Those things are probably built like a tank.
I think if something breaks, though, it would suck.
But I mean, the way that they're built, parts probably aren't too expensive.
I would hope not.
Yeah.
I might look into that. I would love to drive that car. They were great cars. One of my neighbors had one when I was a kid. I used to love it. But anyway, what was the point I was just about to make? Oh, when she's following him home and he's playing the tape and you just hear her talking, and it's like she goes to the house and she's watching him through the window. It's like she might as well be Michael Myers at that point. And that's why I think in some ways this is the type of horror movie that I prefer over stuff like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. Don't get me wrong. I love those kinds of movies for what they are, but I will always find something like this more effective because this is more believable.
Yeah. I mean, I love all horror. It's like a great genre because it requires a lot to put together and do well. And I feel like this is just an example of a film that just is great writing, great screenplay, great directing, great shots, and irrespective of what genre it is, I think this is just really well done in the category.
Great score. Maurice Jarre, multiple Oscar winner. I'm unimpressed.
Yeah, it's okay.
Cynthia, I don't know, that's fine. It's It's fine.
It was the 80s.
It was a very 80s score. I was gonna talk more about the cast, but it's such a small cast. Like his
It's
friend Stuart
super.
Pankin, not a whole lot to say. You know what I
Not
mean? It's like,
really. Yeah. Best scene was probably when they were bowling. He was killing it in bowling.
oh, that's a real quick scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot, not a lot. You get his Beth's parents don't really have any speaking roles other than glaring at Michael Douglas when he comes to visit her in the hospital. And you get
Yeah.
Mr. Munster as the head of the law firm.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I think that it's the film's better for it not having a ton of characters because
Yeah.
we really have our core, and it's just Glenn Close just terrorizing poor Michael Douglas.
Yeah. Well, then we've covered the alternate ending, Glenn Close, Michael Douglas. We just gave our thoughts on the production. Did we like it?
Okay.
What's our rating here, Anton?
Well, I'm ready to jump in. This is I think I've already said a bit right before this, but I feel like this is just a great example of a film in its category that does a great job of proper storytelling, escalation, really nuance and deep characters that don't really show a traditional hero and villain, but just kind of very nuanced protagonist and antagonist. And then, of course, can't forget Anne Archer's character that kind of adds a very human element that really grounds that there is a moral center at this film. And so having a film like this in the late 80s that really jumpstarts a fascination from the audience for erotic thrillers. While it's not my favorite genre, the Michael Douglas horned up genre is a very, very hilarious genre. And this film just is a masterpiece with it. It's not my favorite Michael Douglas performance, but I feel like Glenn Close, hands down, has the best performance in this film and really is just killing it in every scene that she is, completely takes it home, and is able to sell this very desperate and this very mentally disturbed character that really is like an all-time great movie villain because it's just she sells the believability of someone so deranged and crazy. I think that for me, this film is especially underrated nowadays. And I hope that by giving this film a bit more light, more folks give it a visit. For me, this film is a B plus.
For as famous and influential as this film is, it certainly has a reputation to live up to. It was better than I remembered. Very simple story, very effective story, brilliantly acted. I think mostly perfectly paced and genuinely thrilling, even scary in parts. The climax where he tries to drown her in the bathtub. Oh, would you call that an underwater spree, Will?
Yeah, exactly.
Iconic. Glenn Close, it's the best performance of her career. It's iconic. It's every bit as iconic as the legend wants you to believe. And you said it. There is something very entertaining about watching Michael Douglas being horned up and nearly ruining his life. It is a well-deserved classic for a number of reasons. This is the best of its kind. And while I agree with you, it's not my favorite kind of genre. This is absolutely the best of its kind. I'm giving this an A. I think your B plus is low, but that's okay. Yeah, this is an A for me. I can't really fault this movie for anything. It does everything you'd want it to do. So yeah, it's and I will call this a horror movie. It's a different kind of horror movie, but pretty horrifying when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that wraps it up for Fatal Attraction. And what's the next attraction that our listeners can look forward to in the next episode?
It'll be another unconventional kind of horror movie that maybe you wouldn't call a horror movie, but we're covering it for spooky season. We teased this in the very beginning of this episode. It is most likely going to be Zodiac.
Well, now that is a treat. Robert Downey Jr. has been in the news a lot, of course, for being back in the MCU. So,
Yeah. How do you feel about that as a MCU fanatic?
Torn. Absolutely torn. It's their old tricks again. That's all I'll say.
I don't know what to think. Number one, look, we can save this for another discussion, but I'll just give you my reaction to it very briefly. I don't know anything about Doctor Doom except that awful Fantastic Four movie that I saw in the 2000s.
Yeah.
I do know that I love Robert Downey Jr. Now, him playing a villain, especially when he's already played Iron Man, I think is weird. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like Thanos is a pretty iconic villain. I feel like proper villains deserve deserve their own spot of getting like an actor and actress to just create like a defining role. We already have Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, as the Tony Stark. Do we really need him as Doctor Doom? I don't think that he'll do a bad job, but there's so many actors out there. Like, this just really smells like cheap trick to get people to go to see Marvel films again.
I heard they paid him like $80 million. So good for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
More power to him. But yes, Robert Downey Jr. will be in next week's episode. Not him, but his acting performance.
It's funny because it'll be him and the Hulk.
That's right. One of the
Yeah.
Hulks.
Yeah, one of the Hulks.
The best Hulk.
Mark Ruffalo.
Yep. Well, we will see you then. Take care, everyone.